Now it's time to hear the stories of Utes in their own words. This is Utes Insider presented by Pepsi. Here's your host, Mike Lageschulte.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. Well, in the words of the Grateful Dead, what a long, strange trip it has been as we have worked through the past 5 months dealing with the coronavirus pandemic and its effects on college athletics. You know, you think back just to August 5th when Ron McBride and I sat down to record our last podcast. Think about what we had in front of us at that point. Today's date, August 17th, was supposed to be the first day of college football practice in the Pac-12 and on the Utah campus. We had, at that point, a 10-game conference game-only schedule set to begin on September 26th. Well, as it turned out, on Monday, August 10th, Pac-12 medical advisor sent a letter to Larry Scott making recommendations to stop contact and competitive activities. A day later, the Pac-12 announced it will postpone all athletic competition through January 1st. And that announcement is surprising to some, not surprising to some. It really ended 5 months of hypotheticals, hopeful ideas, contingency plans, and what it really means is no football, no soccer, no volleyball, no cross country this fall. Even the winter sports like basketball will be delayed until after the first of the year at least. And a lot of questions, a lot of things to figure out. You know, what does this fall look like for college athletic teams? How does the winter take shape? Could we see spring football in the short term? How do you figure out budgets for the year? Mark Carlin, our AD, announcing last week that Utah's $90 million budget could be slashed by as much as $50 to $60 million with the loss of gate revenue and TV revenue from college football. The good news is a couple of good news items. The Pac-12 Conference announcing a loan program that could help. You know, really, you want to keep things rolling. You want to keep athletes supported. In the Pac-12 and Utah announcing also all scholarships will be protected for student athletes. The NCAA also working to push through an extension of the 5-year eligibility period and add an additional season if needed for athletes. So a lot of good things taking shape already, but still, you know, just a week removed from that big announcement from the Pac-12, still a lot to sort out. And as I was thinking, who would be a good guest for this podcast? One name came to mind right away. Yogi Roth, who has worked for the Pac-12 Networks since day one. He's a former college football player at Pittsburgh, coached for a while at USC, and he's been around this league a lot the last 10 years or so. And I thought he'd be a great guy to come on and talk about how the Pac-12 fits all this together. What do we do with the fall and the spring schedule, and what this stoppage of play this fall could have long-term on the Pac-12. And I also want to get his perspective on the Utah program. He's been around the campus a lot. He's been to practices. He knows Kyle Whittingham well. And just get his take on this Utah program and how it's really evolved during his Pac-12 membership. What makes Kyle Whittingham such a good fit, and kind of his thoughts on what the Utah program could do next to take that next big step and maybe go to a college football playoff in the next 4 to 5 years. I want to get his thoughts on a lot of things, and that's what we will do coming up next. Yogi Roth from the Pac-12 Networks along in just a moment.
To hear more episodes of this show and other Utah Athletics podcasts, search for them on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Now back to more of Utes Insider presented by Pepsi.
He is a longtime analyst with the Pac-12 Networks, a filmmaker, an author, a new dad for the second time, and also a husband. Yogi Roth joining us from his new home in Mar Vista, California. Yogi, appreciate you hopping on this afternoon with us.
Anytime, man. Love talking Utah anything, and especially about a season, even now more so than ever, just to kind of get a little fix in here in August when normally you and I would probably be on a practice field somewhere. At least we could talk ball a little bit.
Yeah, we'll be doing a lot of this stuff this fall. We've got time to fill and sponsorships to take care of, and podcasts and studio programs are a good way to do that. So we'll talk about kind of your fall, how it shapes up in just a moment. But I thought Yogi, as a guy who has been around the Pac-12 Conference and the networks and college football as a player and coach for a long time, I thought you'd be a great person to bring on and give us some perspective on this whole thing as it applies to the Pac-12 and Utah. But let's just kind of talk in general first. I mean, man, what a crazy 5 months it's been. I mean, spring ball had just gotten underway at Utah. They had 1 week of practice. Guys going to spring break, and they never came back. They all went home. We thought all summer and spring, hey, we maybe have a chance to get the season in. They announced a 10-game schedule. They had a start date that was established for middle of August. In fact, today, August 17th, was supposed to be the first day of practice. And then, here we are, nothing for the fall until January 1 at least. As you've watched this all unfold, Yogi, and just kind of been aware of all the details and the what and the why, what have your thoughts been on this situation as coronavirus has had such an impact on college athletics the last 5 months or so?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there. I think for me, the adult in me understands what's going on. And when this came out in March, and the sports world shut down with March Madness, the NBA, you just kind of saw it happening. I remember talking to a few head coaches in our conference and them saying, "How are we ever going to play?"
Yeah.
Knowing what with vaccines. So you knew it then. And I'm an optimistic man by nature, but it was a challenge, to think like the season was going to happen. You had your moments where you thought it was going to maybe go. And then obviously when you saw the numbers trending back up and major Pac-12 footprints, for me, I wasn't surprised. The child in me though was crushed because I've been broadcasting my own game since I was, 6 years old in the backyard, calling myself diver after diver, so this is my 20th year in major college football. It would have been, in some capacity. And I guess it still is in some capacity, just a capacity I never anticipated, which is from the sideline and, from my computer screen and on Zoom and podcasts. But I was crushed. And then you think of the players and you're crushed because I know how much hard work you put in for only 12 opportunities. Same for the staffs and then the extended people that, work in athletic departments. I think of the woman I always say hi to at Rice Eccles coming in the elevator, who's just always so graceful with me when I get there. And you think of every campus, there's somebody like that. And they're not going to have jobs, and those 6 or 7 paydays that they thought they were going to be there, or even, those things that just kept them going, alive in their spirit, because that's what collegiate sports do, specifically football in my eyes, not going to be there. So I felt a lot of different emotions. But where I net out, man, is that this game, I believe it, and many may argue, but I think it's the ultimate team game, point blank, because on every snap, everybody's got to do their job. And if you don't, it's a bust. And everything could fail. And I think all the principles we learned from the ultimate team game, we have to apply. Like, just because I don't get to call a game or you don't get to work a game or a show during the week with Kyle Whittingham or whatever it is, like, doesn't mean that we don't continue to talk about the principles in which our profession was built upon. The commitment, the teamwork, the leadership, the selflessness, the humility. I can go on and on and on.
Yeah.
So I think it's our job to teach and give back. And that's what I'm going to do a lot this fall is connecting with a lot of athletes and making sure that they use the principles they learn on the field and leverage them off it, because the game tells all of us it's done with us. And we don't say we're done for the most part. Very few of us do, even at the highest of levels. So the game said it was done for this year. So what's Nick Ford going to do? How's he going to leverage the game? What's, Grant Keithy going to do? How's he going to leverage the game, and up and down that roster? Because you can't just let the next few months just pass you by.
Right. Nope, totally agree. It's interesting, Yogi. I was on some Zoom calls with our staff talking about marketing for football and other things coming up this fall, and we were all trying to be optimistic, especially when that 10-game schedule came out, and you're like, okay, they're going to give us till late September to try to play a game. There's some bye weeks built in. We can maybe do this, and even though capacity was going to be significantly decreased from what we've been having, I'm like, we've got a chance, but I'm kind of like you. I felt all along, and I told some of our staff people this. I'm like, you know what? I don't know if it's going to happen this fall. There's just so much out there that could go wrong, and just this idea that if a college athlete contracts coronavirus because they played football or soccer or volleyball, and they have complications, or heaven forbid someone dies from this, can we live with ourselves? And I think ultimately that's sort of what led to the decision from the Pac-12 and the Big Ten last week to say we're not playing this fall. We're going to give ourselves some time to see how this virus progresses. Can we get it under control by the first of the year? So I'm guessing you're kind of like me, where you look at the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, say, you know what, they made the right decision. But we've got 3 power conferences, Yogi, who still are going to try to play football, at least as of today, in the ACC, the SEC, and the Big 12. Do you see their logic as well at saying, hey, we want to try to give this a shot in the fall of 2020?
Yeah, well, I think everybody is kind of taking a different approach, which is I think very unfortunate in college football.
Yeah.
It speaks to the divide. Starting again in mid-March, it was every morning that conference commissioners are on the phone making decisions in lockstep. And then when it happens, when everybody cancels their tournament, they didn't all do it together. It was who can get to the media first, who could get the story broken second. And to me, that was like a microcosm of like, oh, I hope this doesn't happen again in the fall.
Yeah.
And everybody was on the same page, and everybody did have all that dialogue. And then all of a sudden, the Big Ten made their announcement of no non-conference games. What? Like it was out of left field. And, even that morning, I think their commissioner was on the commissioner call and didn't bring it up. So was it decided by the presidents? Maybe. I don't know if any of us really know that true answer. But with that, when I look at the Pac-12, they made the decision based on a few things, and I could speak with confidence here because I'm in the middle of it. It wasn't just we don't want, God forbid, a tragic accident on our hands this fall. It was also we don't know enough about this virus, period. Like, we just don't know. And a lot of the information, you can read it in the report that the Pac-12 released, pretty much said that. Like, we're just not confident. And then you look at the current footprints, and California, Arizona, Seattle, it's not amazing. And most places are growing to a large degree, or at least somewhat. So it's not saying, hey, this is under control, especially when some element of students may return to campus, like at Arizona State. When at the time, I don't know what the latest is, but at the time, everybody was coming back to campus. It's 50,000 students. Now, I know they all don't live, on campus, but it's still like, oh, okay, here we go. Like, well, how is this going to play out? So the Pac-12 was dealing in the now, as well as, so we don't know what's going to happen in the future around this. The Big Ten, to me, was all about the future, right? Because their footprints aren't as intense as they are in the Pac-12. And then you look at Michigan, Ohio State, Northwestern, some of these medical schools, and you're like, yeah, I get it, man. And then to answer the question on the other three, look, I get that maybe some footprints may be different, but I also go back to the thing about time. It's not like there's an extended period of time. Every commissioner wants to say, we'll take our time. Totally fair. But it's not like you're going to learn more about the virus necessarily with 2 or 3 weeks extended in terms of the long-term effects. You just never will. And that's, to me, the dice that's going to get rolling. And I hear a lot of times from members of the media, especially in those footprints, saying, well, now you're going to hear people from out west and the Big Ten just try to pressure everybody to not play and how it's inhumane. And that's not it at all. Like, just like we heard a lot of people in the media say, oh, the press is the one, the media is the one that doesn't want the season to happen. And I'm like, dude, we want it to have more than anybody because we don't have jobs.
Right.
if there's no football. So that's ludicrous. And then regarding my first point of, these doctors seeing things differently, I don't think they do see it differently. And I talk to people in the South, they're like, oh, we see it just like you guys do. We're just kind of biding our time. So to answer your question, I anticipate nobody completing a college football season, just based on what we know now. I would be really surprised by that. I hope I'm not surprised. But if I am, and 3 conferences play and finish, good for them. And I don't wish any ill will on them. I hope that they come through dramatically healthy. I hope nobody on Oklahoma is positive. Nobody on Alabama is positive, as you see pictures of people on their campus. Nobody at Clemson is positive, or my alma mater, Pitt, even though you see people on campus. Like, I hope that doesn't happen, right? And I hope nobody's grandmother dies, or nobody's, coaches in ICU who's over 50. Like, I hope it's clean and great, and I'll be fine. And I don't think that's 2 conferences wearing any egg on their face. I think it's 2 conferences saying, this is how we operate. This is our medical advice. And this is how we're going to proceed moving forward, period. And I think it's great. And if we end up being the Big Ten and the Pac-12, the only 2 conferences playing spring football, then let's go have a badass Rose Bowl.
That's right.
We'll own the country. So either way, it's an unfortunate year. It's a dramatic year with so much that has happened in 2020. College football being postponed in 2 conferences is on one hand a bummer, the other one's expected. And it's also kind of expected that the other 3 are doing what they're doing too. And that's a sad state of affairs in the game that I love so much, because there just remains this dramatic divide when there was such an opportunity for unification.
Yeah, you're right. It seemed like all of those Power 5 were in lockstep, and then they just all of a sudden weren't. And, Yogi, you know how it works in college athletics. The conference commissioners take a lot of heat because they end up making decisions or announcing decisions, but they really work for the university presidents. It's not the coaches or the ADs, it's the presidents, and they are advised by the presidents what to do. And the presidents are looking at the medical advice that you referred to that was in a report that our own Dr. Dave Petron contributed to. And you're right, there's so many unknowns about the virus at this point, and the need for more testing and this and that they just felt like at this point to say it's okay to move forward, they couldn't do it in their expert opinion. But I think you brought up a great point, this idea of not just starting a season, but finishing a season. I mean, we've seen issues already with various programs and practice and summer workouts and on campuses that have started the move in this fall that they can get through those seasons in the three conferences, I wish them luck. But man, there's a lot to overcome. But as you watch this process play out and the struggles that these conference commissioners and presidents have dealt with, Yogi, in the past couple of weeks, trying to decide the fate of college athletes and health and budgets and everything that goes into it. I mean, can you wrap your head around what they've been going through the past 2 or 3 weeks?
Your hat goes off to them. I think on one hand, how do you tackle this thing?
Yeah.
Right? How do you prepare for this thing? And then how do you prepare for it and make sure that not only is it successful, but it doesn't hurt the athletic department. It doesn't hurt other sports. It doesn't put you even more of a hole, right? There's some schools that, let's just say they went with what the NFL is doing. I've talked to people in the league and they've been point blank. There's no way what we do in the NFL could happen in college. Daily testing, owning a testing lab, like all the things that the league is doing, protocols around it. It can't happen in college football. And maybe it could happen in a few programs that have an insane amount of revenue that they earn every year, but it can't happen for the majority of Power 5 teams, from everything that I understand. In fact, it would cost almost twice as much to do that. And with a season where you don't have any other sports, you don't have any fan revenue, like it's an even bigger hit to your athletic department, maybe to play than to not play to a certain degree. Yeah. I understand the TV deal and all that, but I just think that they've done everything. And I hope players, and I think they have, you heard a lot of noise around like the Players United movement, around not only what they were trying to accomplish, but thankfully they also celebrated what was going on their campus, right? Kyle Whittingham, Mark Harlan, doing everything possible to make it so we can play. And you go up and down any team, every athlete that I think is worth their salt as a player or as a person has said that, right? So I do think our administrations in this conference have been phenomenal, doing everything, bending their backs to try to get to play. And that's the job, right? Nobody didn't want football, right? Nobody didn't want it done safely. Just at the end of the day, we couldn't do it. And I think athletic administrations and us as a conference did everything we could. And that doesn't always come out necessarily, but I think when the dust settles and you talk to the doctors and the medical personnel and people that are really involved in this every day, they say, wow, yeah, man, like Larry Scott and his staff and all the ADs and all the head coaches, and they went for it, trying to make this thing happen. But at the end of the day, we just said, can't do it in good confidence.
Yeah, I know on our campus at Utah, they came back for workouts. The athletes did June 15th, and to see the efforts our staff went through to plan it, to execute it. And from what I've heard, it's gone very well. They did everything. They had all kinds of plans A, B, and C for contingencies if they did have some issues, and it just didn't come together, unfortunately, at the conference level, and they had to pull the trigger and say, we can't do this. Yogi, I want to kind of tap into your brain as a former college football player as well here with this, because we've seen the fallout now from the decisions the Big Ten and Pac-12 made a week ago, and Justin Fields of Ohio State started a petition for players, and I guess there's now over 200,000 signatures on this thing. And the medical information is there. You can choose to do what you want to with it, but the risks, the unknowns are all laid out for everyone to see. Yet there's a bunch of players, obviously, with 200,000 signatures just in that portion of the country who want to play college football this fall. Yogi, with all the risks we've talked about, as a college football player, you're not making millions of dollars in the NFL, and you've got a short window to play. These guys are on scholarship. They want to play. If you're a college football player, what would make you want to play with everything going on and facing us this fall?
Everything, unless you're compromised medically or someone in your family is, you're saying, let's play.
Yep.
Let's 100% play. And I get it. I would have done the same thing. I probably would have played no matter what, whether I was compromised or somebody else, just because you love it so much. You pour everything into it. And I know Justin Fields. He's a phenomenal young man. He's the best high school prospect I've seen at that position since Jameis Winston, right? And Jameis won the Heisman and was the number one pick.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Justin was a star coming out, and clearly he's one of the, he and Trevor Lawrence, the two faces of college football coming into the season, let alone now, here we are during the pandemic. So not surprised and love it. But I would say this to him if I called him, I'd say, you're not a pro yet. And college athletics has, clearly has its issues. I talked about him earlier with what's going on with college football and the lack of unity among the conferences, let alone the NCAA and what's a sport, what isn't a sport, what's a rule, what's a sanctioned sport. Like there's a lot of blurred lines there, as well as name, image, and likeness, which is clearly coming up. Transfer rules. There's a lot happening, but until the model changes, you're not a pro, right? So this is amazing and it's passionate and I love it, but I don't think that it's going to move the needle one iota, because everybody who was in that meeting with the presidents of the respective schools in that conference and the medical advice saying, yeah, of course we want to play too. We love Justin Fields as much as anybody. We know Ohio State can go win the Natty. They're one of the better teams in the country, clearly coming back this year.
Yep.
But we can't make a decision based on the projection of how good a team or a conference may be. Like, we all want to see Michigan, Ohio State. Who doesn't? We all love that game, but it doesn't matter. So I love it. But I'm also reminded that for the passion that all these young men have and the exuberance they have and how they want to go to work and put all their energy towards it, they're not running college football, and they're not pros and they're not getting paid in college football like a professional would, where you would have a union and you would have a say and you could do things like this, which is why we see other professional sports happening. So yeah, amazing. It's great. I think it'll be a great film one day, but I still don't think there's a chance that Justin Fields suits up this fall.
I'd agree with that. And, I think, Yogi, you and I were talking before we started recording the podcast, everyone's just kind of looking for a piece of normal, trying to remain on a normal path during this pandemic. And for these athletes, it's just the way they're wired. It's kind of how I looked at it. They've been playing sports since they were 4, 5, 6 years old. And this idea that, they're not going to play this fall is so hard for them. And they've had goals set, whether it's winning a national championship for the Buckeyes or winning a conference championship if you played Oregon or Utah, or for a guy who says, you know what, I've got a chance to start or be a key player this year. Maybe next year, if I don't play, maybe that isn't there for me. Or I'm someone who's going to get my degree in December, and the idea that I'm not going to play this fall, I'm done because I can't come back into play in the spring. I've got a job waiting for me. I'm ready to get married. I've got plans. You can't just put life on hold like we want to sometimes. And I'm looking at these athletes. I'm like, I can see why they don't want to play. I really can, despite the fact that there's evidence from the medical side saying you shouldn't. So, I get it, and I see both sides, and that's what makes this thing so complex and at times frustrating. But, Yogi, looking at this fall now, I mean, okay, there's no games across the Pac-12 until January 1. We'll see how it looks then. How do you see the fall working out for athletes in terms of training? Can they take this fall and make it kind of like the spring they never had in terms of maybe fall inter-squad scrimmage or, full contact practices at some point? Is it just cardio? How do you see falls taking shape across the Pac-12 Conference this year?
Yeah, well, as of today, when we're recording this August 17th, my understanding is that the CARA rules, which is basically like how many hours are you allowed to have on campus working out with your coaches in the facility doing football, remains at 20.
Yep.
Which it got extended a couple weeks ago in the anticipation of starting camp today. Now it is campus by campus. So obviously every scholarship is still going to be honored. I would imagine the NCAA is going to allow for an extra year of eligibility. So a fifth-year senior will get a sixth year, et cetera, et cetera. I totally think that will happen and go down. But for these young men, it's a challenge. What I hope happens, I hope that every campus is able financially to keep their student athletes there and stay connected to them in small groups. I don't think you're going to see any scrimmaging, but I think you'll see the pods, the workouts, things that we saw. And at least from a coaching standpoint, they'll get back elements of spring practice that they lost. They'll get to ease young players in. Players that were a little nicked up still will get even more time to rehabilitate. And it'll be even more competitive based on how this recruiting calendar goes. When, let's just say 10 mid-year kids enroll. There's some kids in California that don't have high school football that are trying to enroll right now, right? And they're missing their senior year because they're already going to miss their senior year of playing. So they figure might as well enroll now. So right. I think all of that is to my knowledge, still not yet figured out. But I do hope that every campus has the means to say, you know what, you don't have to go home. Because I do agree with that argument that a lot of coaches made, which is, it might be safer for their athletes to be on campus than go to some of the communities that some of these young men come from. And I totally get that and have lived that.
Yep, I see that as well.
I don't think by by no stretch, I think should everybody be sent home and not be allowed to come back. And the most schools that I've talked to, in fact, I don't know any school that is saying, hey, you can't be here, you can't train, you can't eat, you can't study. So now it's, a unique year, but it's also, as Mario Cristobal said, this time's going to fly by, and we're not going to sit back and pout. Like, let's just get after it even more. And I think that's going to be the case. I think everybody, this stings, it hurts. If other people play, it'll sting even more. But it is a reality. And I mean, how many coaches say the same quote, which is, you control what you control? And right now, they can control their health, their mental health, and of course, making sure they're in good academic standing as a college student athlete.
Talking with Yogi Roth of the Pac-12 Networks on the Utes Insider podcast presented by Pepsi. Yogi, tough question here. I understand it's August 17th. You might not have an answer, but I'm going to ask for your best guess. The idea of spring football has been floated. There's some vaccines out there that are promising that maybe by January 1st, we've got a chance to have those commonly available for everyone. What are your thoughts? Can we pull off a 10-8 game football season come this spring in the Pac-12?
Yeah, I think it could be pulled off. I think that's an aggressive number for me. And I don't know exactly, I know a lot of different models are being thrown out. I would love to see, because if you really study spring football, a lot of teams in our conference take 8 weeks to get through spring ball, right? Because they have finals, they take a week on spring break, right? Some even come back after their quote unquote spring game for another 2 practices. So I think basically taking that window, and I would love to see personally a 6-game season, conference only, and then have your conference championship game, and then go play in the Rose Bowl. Right? Like, let's just say with where we are today, right? So now if you start off 0-2, 0-3, 1-3, you can kind of shut down your stars, right? Like, you don't have to play your best left tackle. You can develop your team and treat it like a spring. And I don't think that puts anybody in harm's way from an injury standpoint. I just think it allows you to really develop your team, right? Regarding the freshmen that are on it, et cetera. So that's how I see it. It'd be, the most competitive, in air quotes, spring ball we've ever had. Yeah. And I think keeping it at a minimum game, the less games, the best. I think that each school, the players will want to play, especially if you're trying to showcase yourself. Like, I look at Amon-Ra St. Brown, draft eligible wide receiver out of USC, one of the top few receivers, I think, in this conference, but needs to prove it a little bit more to play himself into a first, second round pick, right? He'd leave now, maybe a 4th or 5th round pick, but is it worth it? But if you had 6 games, yeah, like that's not, I don't think, a scary number. And same deal if you come back and then go have a full season in the fall, which I know is the goal of every coach that I've talked to. They do not want to sacrifice a full 2021 season for a spring football. So nobody I've really talked to loves the idea of 10 games. 8 games, I think, is a stretch. And I think if 8 games is the most you played, right? So you went conference title, bowl game, or if you just took the conference champion and went playoff, if we had a couple other conferences that opted to play in the spring, would be cool. But I do think as of now, it's going to be so footprint based and what's going on there around this virus that, it's kind of, you think to a degree like, okay, postpone the season. Everybody exhale and go on vacation. We'll talk to you in a couple months. Like, that's the opposite of what's happening. Now it's like double down even harder, planning, procedural on so many levels, scheduling being one of them. So yeah, that's how I could see it. I'd love to see it. I'd love to get some games, love to get some games on television, not only for my sanity and calling them, but also to help the schools out from a financial standpoint. And maybe they can make up some of the loss that they're going to have to incur this fall.
I like the way you're thinking. I had not heard 6 games, but it makes a lot of sense. Like you said, spring football is about an 8-week deal. You've got a chance for a Big Ten Pac-12 Rose Bowl game, and that's the thing I've heard as well from our AD Mark Carlin and some other folks. It's like, if we can get something in the spring, great, but we don't want it to impact the fall of 21. That just seems like that's something they want to avoid, and if that means a shorter spring or no spring, that's kind of how they're thinking right now. In your end of the world, Yogi, TV, everyone talks about, boy, you miss the fall, you miss your TV windows. My thought is, Fox, ESPN, Pac-12 Networks, Big Ten Network, if there's games happening in the spring, they're going to find a way to put them on. And also, we keep hearing about the evolution of live streaming, and with the new media contracts coming up, I think, you know what, this might be a chance to try out some of these and really see if they've got some legs. What are your thoughts on how the media world could look with a 6 to 8 game spring football schedule?
I think it'd be awesome, to be honest with you. I mean, we've seen elements the last 2 years of the AAF as well as the XFL. Like they're people that want to watch.
Yep.
Especially college. You know, college is so different than like these made up teams in random cities, like those two leagues that I just referenced, and they rated well. I mean, we know college players. We know them by their name. We know what high school they went to. We know the expectations they had coming in. We know what they did in, you know, and now we'll know what they did in, I don't know what you want to call it, but like fall workouts, right? Like, oh my God, the message boards will be buzzing. Do you hear what Devon Vele did at wide receiver in, you know, one-on-ones on a, you know, in mid-October, right? So I think anticipation will be awesome. I think it's a great time to, for us, as speaking on behalf of the Pac-12 Networks, we'll call anything and everything, man. You know, to be honest, I mean, Ted and I will go right now and throw down, and Ashley and our crew, we're excited to, because we think that's our job. You know, our job is, you know, of course it's to call games, but it's also to celebrate the game, to coach the viewer, to bring in a sense of excitement and connectivity to their team. So I'm going to do that in the off season, and now when we wish we had football, I'm going to do that when we get to call the game. So yeah, the more the better. And I think that's also going to be a fun time. If you said get creative, I don't know how those contracts work per se in terms of, you know, what are you allowed to do? Mm-hmm. But I do think that, and I don't know everybody at the Big Ten Network, but I'd imagine they feel like we do at the Pac-12, is that I can go 3 deep on Utah. I can go 3 deep on any team. And I'm sure somebody at the Big Ten Network who's their top analyst, James Laurinaitis or whoever it is, he can do the same thing. And I think that's what fans should expect. So it'd be really fun to do that and really hear from like the nerds of your team and your conference. So I'm in. I mean, I would be down if, hey, there's only 6 games and let's just say one of the, you know, bigger networks were calling it. I'd want to simulcast it and call it on ours. Yeah. And just like you do in playoff games, you get your option. You know, I've always wanted to do that, even for Pac-12 title game, is, yeah, listen to Fox or ESPN, but a lot of times those analysts, first time they're even out west.
Yep, they parachute in for a weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, it's not even their fault, but I talked to a lot of those analysts prior to the game, and I'm giving them intel. Like, I always think, especially, you know, the last couple of years, like, man, I just want to call it, you know, just to serve the fan. So I think it could get creative. I'm sure there's a lot of rules around that, but as we know in Corona times, like, you know, every rule that's in stone isn't necessarily in stone right now. So I don't know, but I know that we would be excited to do anything.
Yeah, it could be a lot of fun. Obviously, the money could be different, but it could be fun if we can get something going this spring, and just also to see how networks like yours, the Pac-12 Network, cover the fall and what they do with this fall. Visiting with Yogi Roth of the Pac-12 Networks. Well, Yogi, I always like to bring people on the show and get some outside perspective on the Utes. This is the Utes Insider podcast, and you've been around this program a lot with your series of Drive and calling games and just being around the program. When Utah joined the Pac-12, what were your expectations for their impact on this league, and how is it maybe different 10 years down the road than maybe what you thought you'd see out of Utah when they came into the Pac-12?
Well, unfortunately, I had a very good idea about Utah because I went to Pitt, and my first year broadcasting was when we got smoked in the Fiesta Bowl. And I remember doing that game. I was doing the sideline reporting. And I remember going to practice, and I was like, oh boy, this team's good. So they were always kind of the team that you'd see them in the box score. You'd see what they did in their previous conference and how they would win. Obviously knew of, you know, Alex Smith and Urban Meyer and those types of guys, but never really knew the ethos of the program. And then once they joined the Pac, and I can remember that first year at SC, if it wasn't for a poor spot, they might win that game, right? And then you're like, okay, how do they win this game? Discipline, defense, physicality. Okay, like just wait. And I remember then calling games, talking to Kyle, and him saying, dude, once we get into Cali and can get some of the skill guys, like look out. And that's been the place where they finally have gotten to. So I've seen the build, man. I say that with a lot of pride and unfortunately a little bit of pain at the same time because I saw it in person. But I'm not surprised where they are. I picked them the last couple of years to win the South, and last year I picked them to go to the playoff. So I think that the way Kyle and his team has done it and his staff, in terms of identifying guys that are 3-star guys and then going to get a Jalen Johnson, a huge recruit, finding Nick Ford, who was 5'11", 170 pounds, as a sophomore in high school. It's been amazing watching them continue that development. So I don't think it's slowing down. I think they they would have taken a dip this year just because of the defenders and the amount of people they lost in the NFL. But overall, the culture of the program hasn't changed, and I'm excited to see who the new people are.
Sounds like your star receivers, spend some time with you there, Yogi, from home. Your kindergarten soon to be is jumping in.
That's Zane right there.
There you go.
Yeah, he's ready to play.
Well, tell him I'll let Dad go in a few moments here, visiting with Yogi Roth of the Pac-12 Networks. Before I let you go, Yogi, you mentioned Utah getting more California kids, more skilled kids in the program. They've won back-to-back Pac-12 South titles, but have not made the playoff up to this point. How does this Utah program take that next step and become a college football playoff team in the next 4 or 5 years?
Well, I think they continue to do what they've done, which is, you don't want all of a sudden, because you've been on the stage the last couple of years, abandon what got you there. You can go back in history. I think it was 2002, Washington State. They beat Texas in one of the big bowl games. I'm blanking on which one it was. And then they go out and change their whole recruiting strategy and got in the room of 4 and 5-star guys who couldn't close. Mm-hmm. And if you really track it, that's kind of it might have been the Outback Bowl. It's kind of like the demise of, that program to a certain degree when they started going downward. And then the Paul Wolf era happened, and, finally they got it going, obviously, with Coach Leach. You can't abandon that, even though your brand is stronger and is more well-known around the country. And so I think they do exactly what they have done. You look at them coming to California, get one of the top corners in the country, flip them from Ohio State. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I probably don't do that 3 years ago. I might not do that 2 years ago. But you still kind of continue to find the diamonds in the rough and development, the chip on the shoulder type players. So I think they stay the course, in my opinion, in that regard. They still continue to find a game breaker on offense, though. I still think that's the thing when you net out and you poll Utah fans and say, who's the best receiver that we've had over the last decade? I don't know who they would say. It'd probably be across the board, which might not be a great thing, right? Like Britton Covey is special in his own right. Probably not going to win the Blitnikoff Award, right? Probably not going to be a first or second round draft pick. So to me, that's the thing. And you can develop those guys and find them. Devon Bailey might be that guy this year. I loved what I saw from him prior to his injury last year. But I still think can they get a game breaker on offense? And if they can, look out. And they've got guys that are capable. Jordan Wilmore, they've done well there. But I'd love to see him get one of those types of players. And I'd love to talk to one of those players and say, hey man, go be the guy there. You can rewrite the offensive story there and be a Blitnikoff or be the prototypical number one wide receiver. And Salaminas was kind of that guy coming out of high school. He hasn't lived up to that type of hype, but maybe he has developed enough, and we watch him be a dominant player this fall or whenever we end up playing. But that's the one thing, and I think Kyle would say that too. But what they did last year with Tyler Huntley and Andy Ludwig, Andy's a guy. I'd imagine he's going to be there for a while. At least it sounds like that. So now they keep developing, identifying, growing, and taking on every SC every year in the South. I mean, that's kind of it. And here comes ASU. So it's definitely not easy, but their brand of football, especially in the front seven, it's admirable, and everybody wants to be them. If you polled anybody in the country, they'd say, yes, how do I find Lecky Fotu and Bradley and and those types of players, John Pennicini, when nobody else really did, and develop them into NFL players? Like, that's the secret sauce that Kyle and, Utah's been doing. Really, you can go back to the Kruger brothers and even before that of what they've done regarding that position group.
I talked to Andy Ludwig on one of these podcasts earlier this summer, and he told me, after bouncing around for years and going here, going there, he and his wife just said, hey, let's go to Utah and just ride this thing out and see where it takes us. So I agree with you. I think he'll be here for the long haul, which I think is great. I was excited when he came back last year because during that stretch from 05, 06 to 08, he and Kyle were in lockstep with the offense and what they wanted to do, and it was a great fit the first time. I'm so happy he's back calling the plays for the Utes. Speaking of Kyle Whittingham, he's been around the Utah program for a long time now, 16th year as a head coach. You've been around a lot of coaches, Yogi. What is it that makes Kyle Whittingham work so well at Utah?
Man, it's a lot. I always go back to his quote, and Ashley Adamson or Ted or anybody I've worked with could say Yogi's going to say this right now, and it's quote, "You're either in or you're in the way," and I love that. I think the best coaches in this generation have old school values and new school communication, and that's Kyle. He is out of central casting in terms of a football coach, barrel chested, intense, defensive guy. Talented player, no nonsense, but he's a great communicator. He's got more interest outside of the guy at a central casting, right? Like he's into theater, he's into music, he's into the outdoors, he's a grandfather. Like to me, he's really seasoned in that regard. I think for Utah athletics, I don't know what history would say, but I would say it's probably the greatest gift that Utah athletics has ever had is Kyle Whittingham. Because he stayed and he could have gone to a ton of huge programs in the country. You just kind of look at the history and the jobs he's offered that aren't even reported every year. So I'm a huge fan of him, how he's built it, how it's no nonsense, how they don't back down. I love when he's mic'd up and we do the behind the scenes stuff because he fires me up. And then he gets on an interview and he's as soft spoken as anyone, which is kind of like their defensive line when you interviewed him, right? Like they will rip your hair off if they could, but they'll say thank you and please while they do it to a certain degree. And I just really love it. And as a college football guy in the Pac-12 Conference, I'm really proud that Utah's in the conference. I think it elevates it from a bunch of levels, and Kyle's expertise is one of them.
Well, Yogi, we appreciate the time. I know you're a busy guy, even though there will not be college football this fall. You have a newborn at home, your son Zane, who's ready for kindergarten. You married your wife Amy last summer, and I know you've got a busy fall ahead. And you're a guy also who has a lot of side projects. You're an author. You do some documentaries. What's on your plate the next 3 or 4 months?
Yeah, I got some fun stuff that I hope to complete now, which is really cool. That I think will be a give back to the game, and I'll fill you in on it as it gets closer. But I think that's the biggest thing that I want to leave this podcast with is challenge the players and everybody involved in football to use the game to give back or to advance your life. So to the players, they would be in dozens of film sessions. Can they sit in and have dozens of digital internships? Like, how can you use the game to advance you? And then for those of us that have been so grateful to receive so much from the game, how can we give it away? All right, I'm going to be doing weekly calls with athletes all across the country that aren't playing football this fall. And I'm going to bring experts to them to help them further their lives because I learned those principles in college football. And I think just that sliver of an example is something that I think all of us need to double down on. Like, this is not the time to necessarily, not that we could, I would love to do it, like go to Bali and surf every day. We can't fly there. But B, I think we have to lean into the game. And I'm talking to a bunch of ADs. We're interviewing Mark Harlan on our Pac-12 Perspective podcast this week. Talking to a bunch of head coaches. And that is pretty much the methodology I think a lot of people are into right now.
Well, Yogi, appreciate the time. Some great insight. You can follow him on Twitter at Yogi Roth. He's a busy guy. And even though there will not be live games, Yogi Roth heavily involved in the Pac-12 Networks coverage throughout the fall. Yogi, all the best to you, and we appreciate the time.
You got it. And Zane says hello with all of his toys in his trucks right in front of you right now. So I appreciate you hanging with that.
I know how that goes. Been through it myself, and you know what? Enjoy every moment because it goes by too quick. Yogi Roth, back to wrap things up in just a moment.
For more on Utah athletics, including up-to-date schedules and ticket information, log on to utahutes.com. Now back to more of Utes Insider presented by Pepsi.
Really appreciate Yogi Roth hopping on from Mar Vista, California for this Utes Insider podcast. And his son Zane, who's 5 years old, was tugging at dad to go play. So we appreciate Yogi giving us a good 40 minutes right there to go over just his thoughts on the state of the Pac-12, the state of college football, athletics, and other things as the last 5 months have been so unpredictable and just great to get his insight. And, his mention of a 6-game spring schedule, I had not heard that, but he's right. And I mentioned this during our conversation. The spring normally is about 8 weeks. If you could work 6 games into there, have a Big Ten Pac-12 Rose Bowl at some point and say, you know what, we had some football. We had a chance to watch some football, but let's not do so much that it has a negative impact on getting ready for the fall of 21. I like his thoughts. So we'll see how things play out. But I appreciate him kind of looking into his crystal ball. I mean, it's August 17th. It's so hard at this point to tell how things will work out. But if you get a chance, follow Yogi Roth on Twitter. In fact, I'm going to read a post or parts of it that he had in a post that was put up on August 13th. And he says that there's one thing I've learned through 20 plus years around this brilliant game is that the principles of this game far outlive the big plays, epic wins, and moments broadcasting incredible games. Share what you've learned, pour it into your community, dive deeper into meaningful conversations with those who you love, and just as importantly, those you disagree with. And as Herm Edwards says, let's be sure to leave it on the grass. And he points out that it's going to be a different fall. None of us wearing a headset, lacing up our cleats, going to games. It's going to be different, but still a chance this fall to do some great things and kind of change our focus and change the path of our lives for a few months. And hopefully, after the first of the year, we get back to some college football. That will do it for this edition of Utes Insider. Coming up next week, former Ute Mike Wright, all-conference linebacker who played for the Utes during that 2008 Sugar Bowl season. He will be my guest. Thanks to Mike Gillen on the technical side. I'm Mike Lageschulte. Until next time, shalom, everybody.
This has been Utes Insider presented by Pepsi. To hear more episodes of this show and other Utah athletics podcasts, search for them on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube.